In this lesson, I describe the principles, policies, and procedures needed to manage the security risks associated with human behavior, including least privilege, separation of duties, need to know, background checks, employee privacy, and other topics. Regardless of how many controls we put in place, gaps exist for which we rely on user behavior and continued levels of trust. But humans make mistakes. They can also turn malicious due to personal or employment-related conditions. These challenges result in 95% of all security incidents being enabled by user behavior. Mitigating user behavior risk starts with integrating three principles into all access controls and business functions: separation of duties, least privilege, and need to know. Implementing the separation of duties principle ensures that no one person can complete all required tasks for a business process or function. In this graphic, the AP manager is prevented from performing two required tasks. Unlike some believe, managers at all levels are also subject to separation of duties and other personnel control principles. Least privilege controls what a user can do with the information she can access. In other words, a user can only act on information in ways that are necessary to complete business tasks or comply with regulations. In this example, a nurse can access all data for a patient for whom she is responsible. However, she can't change treatment approaches. Need to know controls what information a user can see. An employee should only be able to see the information essential to perform business tasks. In this example, a certified nurse assistant is allowed access to patient information, but he can't see all EPHI. He can only access the information needed to take vitals and perform other CNA tasks. In addition to implementing the personnel principles across all access controls, we also need to hire the right people. Employee trust must be earned, and this begins with a potential hire having the right character for the job. Organizations do this with interviews and background checks. Interviews and the verification of resulting potential hire claims are the first and most popular way of screening new hires. The procedure begins with understanding the skills needed and the level of trust expected. Both technical and general character questions should be included in the interview. Having the team with which the potential hire will work conduct the initial interview is an excellent way to get a broad view of the interviewee's fit. Once the interview is complete, the hiring manager or HR should verify employment, education, and certification claims. In addition, communication is needed with professional and personal references. Background checks enable organizations to go deeper into a person's character when the interviewee's potential role requires significant trust. Checks can include identity verification, driver history, social media, credit history, criminal records, legal residency, medical records, and drug testing. Background checks are essential for business protection, but organizations also have to take care when checking into the history and current character of candidates or existing employees. State and federal laws regulate how to conduct background checks while protecting privacy and fairness in hiring. The U.S. Credit Reporting Act includes specific requirements. A regulatory agency that governs background check use and how to maintain fair hiring practices is the U.S. Equal Opportunity Commission, or EEOC. Typical requirements include notifying a potential hire of the need for a background check, followed by the candidate's written consent. If ongoing checks are part of employment, the candidate must be notified during the hiring process. Finally, a candidate must be informed and consent to interviews of family, friends, business acquaintances, and any other targets of a background check. A non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, is a standard document used to protect confidential information. An NDA can be unilateral, protecting only one party, or bilateral, protecting both parties. NDAs can protect anything an organization considers sensitive, including customer and financial information, trade secrets, processes, and physical assets. An important thing to remember is that an NDA cannot be too broad. It must be reasonable and appropriate, or the courts are not likely to enforce it. Every organization should have an acceptable use policy. The policy specifies what employees can and cannot do with information assets, including email, computers, cell phones, networks, and applications. It must also contain sanctions for violating the policy. Another condition that can place information assets at risk is a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest exists when an employee or other entity has a duty of due care to one organization while having other interests or obligations that do or might conflict. Conflicts can be financial or non-financial. Gifts to employees are commonly controlled by policy. However, I once worked for a company that did not have one initially. IT managers accepted expensive gifts from vendors and others without any consequences. This situation resulted in shortcuts taken with IT processes, including security. Eventually, I wrote a management-approved policy that removed this challenge. Gifts to employees must be managed based on the cultural environment in which a business facility resides. While managing these differences, organizations should set gift limits and develop procedures followed when gifts exceed a specified limit. The policy should also include specific conditions under which an employee can accept a gift. One of the most effective ways to detect insider fraud or other unwanted behavior by employees is by implementing mandatory vacations. The mandatory vacation policy defines how often employees should take a vacation and how long the vacation should last. Further, the user's access to information resources and facilities should be disabled during the vacation period. Onboarding is the process of processing new hires into the organization. It should include an orientation that sets the organization's expectations. Orientation should also include a review of the acceptable use policy. The new hire should sign a document that specifies that he or she understands acceptable use and will comply. Correctly managing terminations is an essential piece of personnel management. It helps prevent insider threats because of retaliation or other motives. Termination management begins with a policy that specifies how security is to be notified of terminations and when. Procedures are then created for both voluntary and involuntary terminations. Voluntary terminations, an employee quitting on their own, result in disabling all access within a period specified in the policy. This period should consider what the former employee had access to. Involuntary terminations must be managed carefully to prevent retaliation. First, the employee's manager should inform security of the termination and the time it will happen. The security team then disables the employee's access during the termination meeting. Finally, the terminated employee should be escorted from the termination meeting until he or she leaves the building. In addition to managing employee access, organizations must also manage third-party access. Third parties include system and network maintenance vendors, third-party application developers, and data center maintenance companies. One of the ways that we manage third-party personnel is with a non-disclosure agreement. For contractors with access to highly sensitive information and critical systems, an organization should consider ensuring that the contractor performs regular background checks on its employees. Finally, contract personnel should not use generic accounts. This bypasses accountability. Instead, each contractor that requires access should have a named account with a specified expiration time or date. For data center access, it's best practice for an organization's employee to escort a contractor during the entire time he or she requires data center access. Standards that include managing third parties include the NIST SP 800-171, ISO 27005, and COBIT. The final piece of personnel security management rests on the shoulders of management. Employees have a reasonable expectation of privacy even when using the organization's resources. For example, reviewing personal employee emails without cause has been found to be a violation of employee privacy. Although regulations differ between states and countries, three general principles apply to why an organization should monitor one or more employees. First, to maintain a professional work environment. Two, to ensure compliance. And third, to minimize sharing of confidential information. Before starting monitoring, an organization should follow accepted best practices, including notifying employees that they are subject to monitoring. This should be included in the employee manual and covered in new hire orientation. Employers should also document the consequences for unwanted behavior discovered via monitoring. And finally, both monitoring and the application of sanctions must be consistently applied to all employees. Well, that's it for this lesson. If you have questions, please ask. And until next time, be careful what you click.